Hollywood once called Angie Dickinson the woman who knows every powerful man's secrets, but it wasn't until the final years of her life that she began to reveal the stories behind the curtain, the secrets no one dared to speak of for half a century. And among all the names she worked with, the one that lingered in Angie's mind the most was Dean Martin, the legendary king of cool, a man who wore more masks than anyone in Hollywood. Now, Angie Dickinson has decided to break her silence. Her revelations unveil a series of shocking truths, from rumors of a gay admirer pursuing Dean Martin throughout the 1960s to their own secret romance. From the 20-year silent fallout with Jerry Lewis to the darkness surrounding the Rat Pack and the Mafia's grip over Las Vegas. If you think you already know who Dean Martin was, prepare yourself, because the next pages will dismantle everything you thought you knew about him. 1. I never truly understood Dean Martin. He was a mystery that even Hollywood didn't dare open. Angie Dickinson, the woman who once stood beside the brightest stars in Hollywood, has finally spoken. As one of Dean Martin's closest friends, she remained silent for half a century about the man the entertainment world praised but never truly knew. For years, she witnessed a Dean Martin made up of many layers, a far cry from the cool, effortless icon the public believed him to be. A man of charm and charisma on stage, yet full of shadows and secrets once the curtain fell. Rumors about Dean Martin's sexuality simmered throughout the 1960s, but few dared speak openly. Hollywood, with all its glamour, has always protected its untouchable facade. A world of stars, late-night parties, hidden couples, and endless whispers. While names like Frank Sinatra and Sammy Davis Jr. lived loudly with scandals and laughter following them everywhere, Dean chose a different path. Quiet, ambiguous, almost strange. In 1959, when Angie Dickinson first worked with Dean Martin on Rio Bravo, Hollywood was already buzzing about this unusual man. His colleagues, no matter how close, could never fully figure him out. He avoided wild nightlife, skipped the flashy affairs, and simply slipped away from parties without drawing attention. Some, including Angie, believed Dean wasn't the type of man anyone could easily grasp. He was private, elusive, and full of unanswered questions. During the months of filming, Angie couldn't help but notice how different he was from the image the public adored. Despite being the king of cool Dean, Martin stayed withdrawn when the lights went out. Many wondered quietly, was Dean Martin? Gay gossip columns hinted at his unusually close relationships with Rat Pack members, especially Sammy Davis Jr. and Frank Sinatra, the era's most powerful entertainers. His distance from women and his early exits from parties only fueled more speculation. Rumors swirled that his bonds with certain men in the Rat Pack, from Sinatra to Truman Capote, stemmed from a closeness no one could explain. Angie, in private conversations with her colleagues, often wondered about Dean's silence. She believed he was the kind of man who left Hollywood puzzled, not because he lacked charm, but because he was simply unknowable. Reflecting on her time with him, Angie said Dean was the kind of man who always made you feel there was an invisible wall between you and him. He never let anyone truly enter his world. For Dean, privacy wasn't a choice, it was his nature. Hollywood continued to whisper about him. The coldness, the lonely nights, the baseless rumors. But perhaps only people like Angie Dickinson understood that what Hollywood saw was never the whole man. Dean Martin's world was a complicated one. A world lit brightly for outsiders, but full of shadows for those who got close. And only now, as Angie finally opens the door, can the rest of us glimpse the truths he carried in silence. 2. The day Dean Martin decided he would never look Jerry Lewis in the face again. He didn't just end their relationship coldly. He set off a tragedy that lasted 20 years. Their friendship ended in a silence so deadly it felt as if the two had never shared a glorious past together. When Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis worked together, they were Hollywood's golden duo. From 1946 to 1956, they didn't just dominate films, they ruled radio and television, becoming America's #1 comedy team. They appeared in more than 16 films, overflowing with laughter, chemistry, and impeccable timing. They were inseparable, like the great comedy pairs of the previous generation. But behind the laughter were conflicts that could never be untangled. Two very different men heading toward an inevitable clash. Jerry Lewis, widely praised as the ancestor of modern comedy, was an extreme perfectionist. Every night before going on stage, Lewis would endlessly adjust the script, repeat every movement, and push himself into strict routines to achieve perfection. He was a man with boundless ambition, obsessed with flawless execution down to the smallest detail. Dean Martin, by contrast with his laid-back personality, didn't care about such minutiae. To him, it was enough to show up, perform naturally, and walk off stage. Dean couldn't tolerate the suffocating tension of doing everything over and over each time Lewis wanted to change something. When differences turn into wounds. With all the brilliant successes they achieved together, Dean and Jerry inevitably faced differences in the way they worked. Jerry Lewis, a man with a grand vision of perfection, gradually began to see Dean as a lazy man who never put in the effort to improve his roles. They were a pair of complete opposites. Lewis was energetic and painstakingly meticulous, while Dean lived in a very natural, spontaneous way, never planning things too carefully. This led to growing tension between the two. Jerry Lewis's suggestions to change scenes or adjust scripts were ignored by Dean. Lewis constantly urged Dean to join in detailed rehearsals, but Dean would simply show up, perform effortlessly, and rarely participate in the tedious practice sessions. Each time this happened, Jerry's anger grew. He saw injustice in Dean's working style and felt abandoned. Moreover, as the public began calling Jerry a genius, while Dean was increasingly seen as merely the guy standing next to him, Dean's frustration pushed their relationship toward the breaking point. But perhaps the biggest shock was that Dean's personality, his calm nonchalance, his indifference to perfection, and his desire to play his own game was no longer compatible with Jerry's boundless ambition. When rehearsals failed to bring the desired results and Jerry's pressure increased, Dean began to withdraw, and that withdrawal became the beginning of the end for their partnership. July 24, 1956 marked the final performance of Martin and Lewis at the Copacabana, where they had once created legendary moments together. It was a dazzling night, but also one filled with coldness. After the show, Dean Martin said nothing to Jerry. There was no handshake, no friendly pat on the shoulder, no words of gratitude or congratulations. Dean simply walked straight out the back door, leaving everything behind without looking back. It was a quiet ending, yet profound and harsh. They did not just part ways in complete silence. That silence lasted for 20 years. For 2 whole decades, they never met, never called, never sent a message. Dean never looked at Jerry again. The relationship they had built over so many years collapsed in an instant like a sandcastle before the wind. Once a door closes, Dean Martin never opens it again. Angie Dickinson once said of Dean Martin, "When Dean closes a door, he never opens it again." That was how Dean lived, how he faced hurt and disappointment. When he decided to end a relationship, whether friendship or partnership, he would never return. It happened with Jerry Lewis, and it would happen with others throughout his life. The aftermath of their breakup. For the next 20 years, the relationship between Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis was never restored. There were no meetings, no explanations, no reconciliation. Dean Martin continued his solo career, becoming one of Hollywood's biggest stars, but his relationship with Jerry Lewis remained an unhealed wound. Meanwhile, Jerry struggled to reclaim his former glory while feeling deeply betrayed. To Angie Dickinson, witnessing their painful breakup, she could only look at Dean and acknowledge that he was a man capable of love. But once he chose to walk away, no one could change his mind. Dean remained silent, letting everything drift into the past, never to be revisited. And that was perhaps the deepest cut in Dean Martin's life, a wound that even if they had lived to 100, neither man would ever have a chance to heal. 3. Dean Martin appeared to be a drunken, carefree playboy, but the truth is that he only drank apple juice on stage. And much of his life, at least in the public eye, was a perfectly constructed performance. In the 1960s, Las Vegas was a place of glittering stage lights every night, lively jazz music, and untold stories behind the glamorous curtains. Everything revolved around the Rat Pack, the constellation of stars adored by millions. Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin, Sammy Davis Jr., Peter Lawford, and Joey Bishop. Together, they dominated every stage, becoming a vivid symbol of the entertainment world's power, extravagance, and intoxicating indulgence. But among them, Dean Martin was always the strangest. The glamorous life of the Rat Pack's light and shadow. The Rat Pack's image was perfectly crafted for the public dark night: stage lights, liquor, and beautiful women. They symbolized freedom, endless nights, flowing alcohol, and broken rules. But what people saw on stage was only a small part of a much bigger story. Dean Martin, nicknamed the King of Cool, was unlike the others. He could make the world laugh with effortless charm, natural humor, and a unique coolness impossible to imitate. Yet, the truth was that alcohol, the symbol of joy and freedom within the group, wasn't really Dean's companion. Dean Martin, the man known as the Rat Pack's drunk, only drank apple juice on stage. The stories of Dean stumbling around with a drink in hand were part of an act he crafted for the public. Though he joked about having a drinking problem and embraced the image of a rebellious playboy, the reality was quite different. Those close to him insist that Dean was always the most sober member of the Rat Pack and rarely drank real alcohol on stage. It was simply part of the performance. Like everything he did, a role he played flawlessly. Despite being one of the group's brightest stars, Dean tended to keep his distance from women. While other Rat Pack members had public affairs and scandals, Dean avoided the chaos. Many actresses from the era confessed that Dean seemed noticeably shy around women, especially in informal settings. Some believed he deliberately kept his distance to avoid the relentless romantic scandals that plagued Hollywood. One story goes that Dean was always the first to leave a party while his friends stayed until dawn. One of his friends once remarked, "Dean is always the first to go home. He doesn't like crowds, never joins in the foolish late-night antics, and I think he does it to keep his image clean." These words captured Dean Martin's true nature. A man who didn't want to be involved in scandalous affairs, who didn't want to become just another headline. He cultivated sophistication and elegance while those around him embraced chaos. But the media and the public didn't care about the truth. They only saw Dean Martin plus Rat Pack farmers, liquor women, and scandal. To them, Dean was a carefree playboy, a man who lived recklessly without consequences. The press and filmmakers didn't see the difference between Dean and the others. They saw only a marketable image, a romantic man lost in endless nights of partying with a drink always in hand. However, behind that facade was a very different Dean Martin, a man living inside a role he himself had created. His onstage persona was a costume he wore every night. Outside the spotlight, he sought peace. Dean didn't enjoy the wild nights, but he knew it was the image the public expected. For years, the Rat Pack represented rebellion and freedom, but the very artificiality of Dean's public image made him into a symbol no one could truly understand. Dean Martin, with the easy smile, relentless jokes, and drinking problem described by the media, was in fact a very sober man. He used the mask of a drunk, carefree playboy to hide a completely different person, one known only to those closest to him. So in the end, was Dean Martin truly a reckless playboy? Or was he a man simply seeking peace, wanting to stay away from Hollywood's entanglements? Only Dean could answer that everyone else can only guess. It is a story that people still tell to this day, an inseparable part of the legend of a star who left an unforgettable mark on the world of entertainment. For Dean Martin may have been the king of cool on stage, but behind the lights, he was a man with deep ties to the mafia, where power and secrecy intertwined. When people think of the Rat Pack, they imagine long nights filled with liquor, jazz, and limitless freedom. However, behind the extravagant parties of Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin, and the rest of the group, there was always a lingering shadow, the mafia. And when speaking of the mafia, one cannot ignore Sam Giannana, the boss of the Chicago outfit, whose connections extended not only to Sinatra, but also to Dean Martin. Sam Giannana, a major figure in Chicago's underworld, played a crucial role in shaping the careers of stars like Sinatra and Martin in Las Vegas. In fact, by the late 1950s, the FBI had begun opening multiple files to investigate the relationships between Giannana and Rat Pack members, suspecting that these social links were far more than simple friendships or artistic collaborations. John Cena, with his deep involvement in organized crime, had complex ties with the biggest names in Hollywood at the time, and Dean Martin was no exception. In numerous declassified documents released years later, Dean Martin's name appeared on the FBI's list of social contacts, fueling public suspicion about his connections to the underworld. Reports indicated that Martin had attended private parties organized by Giannana in Las Vegas, exclusive gatherings where mob bosses and powerful underground figures were always present. These meetings weren't merely casual get-togethers, but were tied to silent agreements no one dared to speak of. Long nights and unsettling silence. What surprised many was Dean Martin's demeanor around mafia bosses. A former security employee at the Sands Hotel, where these private parties were routinely held, recalled, "Dean Martin never looked scared around the mob bosses. He seemed to have known them for years. Nothing ever rattled him." This only deepened the mystery surrounding Dean Martin. A man whom the public knew as a charming entertainer, indulging in glamorous late-night revelry. But behind the stage presence was another truth. Dean was protected and shielded by powerful underworld forces, people who helped him maintain his flourishing career in Las Vegas. Dean Martin's Vegas career was secretly protected. Hollywood was overflowing with rumors that Dean Martin's career in Las Vegas, where he frequently performed at elite casinos and hotels, was safeguarded by his connections to the mafia. While the public saw a cheerful Dean Martin enjoying a luxurious life of tours and endless parties, those inside the entertainment industry knew his success wasn't solely due to talent. Many claimed that Dean's ability to thrive in Las Vegas came from what happened behind the curtain, where mob bosses and underground power players ensured his safety and career stability. These stories were always whispered, never confirmed, but they were enough to shroud Dean Martin's name in the fog of the underworld, a place without light and where nothing could be seen clearly. Mafia and Hollywood, the untold story. Dean Martin may have been the symbol of cool on stage, but somehow he became an inseparable part of Hollywood's larger story with the mafia. The secret parties in Las Vegas, the nights drenched in alcohol and power, were not just the social lives of movie stars. They were places where decisions were made in the shadows. Stars like Frank Sinatra and Dean Martin did not interact with mob bosses merely for personal gain. They became part of an underground power circle where both their careers and their survival could be influenced by unseen forces. Despite all the rumors surrounding Dean Martin's ties to the mafia, one thing remains undeniable. His name will forever be associated with the image of a man unshaken by Hollywood storms or the schemes of the underworld. He lived and performed in his own way, protected by forces in the dark, and perhaps because of that, he became one of Hollywood's most legendary, enigmatic stars. Maybe Dean Martin, as a key part of the Rat Pack, will always live on in the public's memory as a symbol of glamour. Yet behind the lights, his life remains a story, never fully told a story. Only those within the mafia could possibly understand. 5. Dean Martin and Angie Dickinson never admitted their relationship. Yet, Hollywood never forgot the quiet intimacy between them. An affair so secret it could have shocked the entire industry if exposed. In 1959, on the set of Rio Bravo, a secret love story began to unfold between two Hollywood stars, Dean Martin, the effortlessly cool leading man, and Angie Dickinson, a rising beauty of the silver screen. Their relationship was not built on open displays of affection or sweet on-camera moments. In reality, their closeness was so difficult to conceal that rumors quickly spread throughout Warner Brothers. Crew members working on Rio Bravo noticed something unusual. While Dean Martin was famous for being reserved and always the first to leave the set, he often stayed late just to talk with Angie Dickinson. This puzzled many. Dean, who was known for being indifferent to romantic entanglements, was suddenly spending his free time chatting and laughing with Angie, something he never did with anyone else. Producer Jerry Barker once joked, "If those two aren't dating, then Hollywood is running out of magic." The romance between Dean Martin and Angie Dickinson was never officially confirmed, yet their closeness and undeniable chemistry were impossible to ignore. During filming, they appeared together almost daily, not only on screen, but off it as well. Everyone in the crew sensed a special connection between them, something both Dean and Angie chose to keep silent, never making it public. Years later, Angie Dickinson described their relationship as sweet but fragile. To Angie, it was elusive, a quiet bond neither of them wanted to acknowledge, even though everyone else saw it clearly. Their relationship became one of Hollywood's unspoken legends, a beautiful yet mysterious romance that was never declared, but left a deep impression on those who witnessed it. Why couldn't their relationship be public? No one truly knows how far their relationship went, but one thing is clear. Dean Martin and Angie Dickinson created a love story unlike any other. In an industry where secrets are almost impossible to keep, they chose to protect theirs. Why? The answer may lie in Dean Martin's nature. He was a man who avoided noise, who hated having his private life exposed. He understood that such a relationship could create unnecessary complications for both their careers. The connection between Dean and Angie found its place in Hollywood legend. A beautiful yet hidden romance, a bond that was never acknowledged publicly but remained unforgettable to those who saw it. In the end, silence was what made their love story one of Hollywood's most memorable secrets. 6. Dean Martin may have been the king of cool on stage, but behind the bright lights, he was a man living in the shadows of his own life. A place no one, not even family, could truly enter. Hollywood remembers Dean Martin as a legendary star, an icon of calm, effortless charm and unmatched coolness. Yet few people know that behind the glamour, Dean was an enigmatic man in his private life with complicated family relationships and a soul that perhaps only those closest to him could ever glimpse. Dean Martin went through 3 marriages, each lasting many years, but ending imperfectly. His first marriage to Betty McDonald lasted from 1941 to 1949 before they parted ways after 8 years together. Not much is known about this relationship, but its end marked the closing of an early chapter in Dean's life. Next came his marriage to Jean Beggar, 1949 to 1973, who stayed by Dean's side for 24 years. They had 3 children together, but even this long marriage could not last, ending in 1973. Throughout their years together, Jean was often described as the enduring wife because life with Dean Martin was anything but easy. Family accounts reveal that although Dean was a responsible provider emotionally, he was often absent. Dean's third marriage was to Katherine Hahn, 1973-1976. They married when Dean was already 56 and had 1 daughter together. However, the marriage lasted only 3 years. reinforcing the truth that while Dean was magnetic on stage, he was a man difficult to hold on to in the intimacy of family life. Despite having 7 children, those close to Dean often said he was emotionally absent in his private life. A famous remark from his son, Dean Paul Martin, left many people quietly heartbroken. "My father was in the room, but his mind was somewhere far away." This not only highlights the emotional distance between Dean and his children, but also reflects a sad reality of his inner life. He was physically present, yet spiritually somewhere else entirely. Dean Martin lived in a world of his own, sharing his thoughts and feelings with no one, not even his family. It was a part of him that many in Hollywood could never understand. Angie Dickinson, who worked with Dean on Rio Bravo and knew him closely, also described Dean as someone who lived inside his own private world. And this was not merely her personal impression. She portrayed Dean as a man difficult to reach, someone who kept a deliberate distance, even from the people he cared about most. She once said Dean always lived in his own world, never letting anyone in, not even the people he loved. Though many considered him a loyal friend, Dean Martin often failed to express affection to those closest to him. His relationships at home were wrapped in silence because he never shared his true thoughts or emotions. Dean Martin, with his composed demeanor and cool exterior, could easily charm an audience. Yet he himself was trapped in loneliness. Failed marriages, emotional distance from his family, and the burden of a life he could never fully share created an image of deep contradictions. The man adored as the king of cool was in reality someone unable to escape the walls he built around his private life. Despite his glamorous public persona and widely discussed relationships, Dean Martin carried profound emotional wounds, a tangled family life, and a private world filled with unspoken feelings. His solitude and emotional absence at home were parts of him that audiences might sense on stage, but very few ever touched in real life. Dean Martin's life was always defined by a contrast between his flawless stage persona and the darkness of his private world. Although he was the king of cool in the eyes of the public behind that, Shine was a distant man living in isolation and emotionally unavailable even to the people he held dearest. A Hollywood icon, yet also a man burdened by a loneliness no one fully understood. So, what do you think of Dean Martin? A man whose public image and personal relationships were all shaped by deep, hidden secrets. Share your thoughts with us, and don't forget to follow for more untold stories of Hollywood's legendary stars.